The Wasteland was a graveyard, and I hated every second of being in it. Outside the wall, nothing made sense. The sun was too bright, the air too still, and the silence carried a weight that pressed against your skull, daring you to break it. Even the ruins of what had once been civilization felt wrong. Twisted metal and crumbled concrete standing like monuments to a world that didn't want us anymore. I adjusted the strap on my rifle and glanced at the scout beside me. Samuels was younger than me, greener, but the wall needed the supplies he'd been sent to find. My job was to get him back safely, no matter how much I despised being this far from home. "You hear that?" Samuels asked, breaking the quiet. I stopped walking, holding up a hand to silence him. My ears strained against the stillness. Nothing. That didn't make me feel better. No. And that's the problem. Keep moving. He didn't argue. We were cutting through an old industrial zone, its skeletal remains clawing at the sky. The silence followed us, broken only by the crunch of rubble under our boots. Every shadow felt alive, every alley a potential death trap. Then we saw him. A man stumbled out from behind a rusted shipping container, his hands raised in a gesture of surrender. He looked like hell, clothes torn, face gaunt, and blood crusted on one arm. His eyes darted between us, wild and desperate. "Help!" he croaked, his voice raw. "Please, I need help." Samuels hesitated, his rifle half raised. "You think he's legit?" I kept my rifle trained on the man, taking a step forward. "Who are you? Why are you out here?" He coughed, staggering toward us. "Name's Beck. Got separated from my group. Horde came through a few miles back. Please, don't leave me out here." His voice cracked on the last word, and for a second, I almost believed him. But something didn't sit right. He wasn't looking at us. His eyes kept darting past us, like he was checking for something. "You injured?" I asked, narrowing my eyes. He held up his bloody arm. "Cut myself climbing over a fence. I'm not infected, I swear. Please, I can lead you back to the wall. I know a safe route." Samuels looked at me, his face tense. "We can't just leave him here." "No," I said. "But that doesn't mean we trust him." I gestured for Beck to drop to his knees. He obeyed quickly, too quickly. Something about it felt rehearsed. "I'll check him," I muttered to Samuels, keeping my rifle pointed at Beck. "Cover me." As I approached, Beck started babbling. "I can help you, I promise. I've been out here for weeks. I know where the hordes move. I've seen the scavenger camps. I can get you through this." "Quiet," I snapped, crouching in front of him. His arm was bleeding, but the wound wasn't fresh. It looked like it had been reopened, intentionally. I frowned, leaning closer. That's when I saw it. On the inside of his jacket, barely visible, was a patch of cloth marked with a symbol I knew too well. The twisted, looping emblem used by scavenger gangs to mark their members. My stomach tightened. "Where's your group?" I demanded, my voice cold. Beck froze, his eyes widening. I told you. I got separated." I grabbed his jacket and yanked him closer. "Don't lie to me. If there are scavengers out here, I need to know right now." "I swear, I'm alone," he stammered, but his eyes flicked past me again. "Sonny," Samuels barked, his voice sharp with alarm. I turned just in time to see movement in the shadows, a fleeting glimpse of figures ducking behind a crumbled wall. "Get up," I hissed, hauling Beck to his feet. "And start talking, now. I don't know what you're—" "Move!" I shouted, shoving him forward. Samuels and I flanked him, our weapons drawn as we hurried down the narrow path. My pulse pounded in my ears. We needed to find cover, somewhere to regroup and figure out what the hell was going on. Ahead, Beck stumbled, his steps faltering. "They'll kill me if I talk," he whispered, his voice trembling. I grabbed his arm, spinning him to face me. "I'll kill you if you don't." He swallowed hard, his gaze darting between me and the shadows behind us. "There's a group nearby, scavengers. They sent me to find supplies, to scope out anyone coming from the wall." "And the Horde?" "They're close," he admitted, his voice barely audible. "But not here yet." "Sonny," Samuel said, his voice low. "We've got to move." I nodded, my grip tightening on my rifle. "If he's lying, he's bait, and if he's telling the truth—" "We're already in trouble," Samuels finished grimly. We kept moving, the shadows around us closing in, and for the first time in years, I felt completely out of my depth. The wasteland had a way of swallowing sound. Every step we took seemed to echo, only to be devoured by the vast emptiness around us. Beck walked ahead, his shoulders hunched, his gaze flitting nervously from shadow to shadow. Samuel stayed close to me, his rifle raised, his eyes constantly scanning for threats. "What are you looking for?" I asked Beck, my tone sharp. "They're out there," he muttered, barely audible. "They're always out there." "Who's they?" Samuels asked, his voice tense. Beck didn't answer. He just kept walking, his pace quickening as if he could outrun the question. We passed through a stretch of rubble that might once have been a housing development. Broken walls jutted out of the ground like shattered teeth, and the air was thick with the smell of decay. I stopped when I spotted something on the ground. A set of footprints, fresh and deliberate, leading in the same direction as us. I crouched, tracing the outline of the prints with my fingers. "Samuels, take a look." He knelt beside me, frowning. "Not ours." "No," I said, glancing up at Beck. "Not ours." Beck froze, his face pale. "I told you, they're watching." I stood, my rifle raised. "Keep moving. And if this is a trap, you won't be walking much longer." We pressed on, the unease settling over us like a second skin. Beck's muttering grew louder, his nervous energy contagious. Samuel stayed silent, but I could feel the tension radiating off him. As we approached the remnants of an overpass, Beck slowed, his gaze darting around wildly. "What now?" I demanded. "They'll be close," he whispered. "We need to hurry." "Who?" Samuels asked, his grip tightening on his rifle. "The Scavengers," Beck said. "They don't miss anything that moves out here. They'll have seen us by now." I stepped closer, shoving the barrel of my rifle against his chest. "If you've led us into an ambush, I'll make sure you don't walk out of it." Beck's eyes filled with tears. "I didn't have a choice. Sonny," Samuels interrupted, his voice urgent. "We've got movement." I turned, my heart sinking. In the distance, figures emerged from the shadows, their silhouettes jagged and unkempt. Scavengers. They moved with a purpose, spreading out as they approached, their weapons glinting in the dim light. "Get to cover," I ordered, grabbing Beck and dragging him toward a cluster of debris. Samuels followed, his rifle aimed at the advancing group. The Scavengers didn't rush. They didn't need to. They knew the terrain better than us, knew the wasteland's tricks and traps. They were closing in, step by deliberate step, like predators cornering prey. "What do we do?" Samuels asked, his voice tight. "Hold position," I said, scanning the area. "We don't fire unless we have to." Beck huddled behind a chunk of concrete, his body trembling. "They'll kill us," he whispered. "They'll kill you," I said. "You're the one who brought them here." A voice rang out from the Scavengers, loud and mocking. "You know how this ends. Drop your weapons and we'll make it quick." I didn't reply. The Scavengers stopped just out of range, their leader stepping forward. He was lean, his face scarred and weathered, with a grin that made my skin crawl. "Beck," he called out. "Nice work. Now step aside and let us handle the rest." Beck flinched, his head dropping. "I'm sorry," he whispered. I shoved him toward the Scavengers. "Go. You're their problem now." He stumbled forward, his hands raised. "Wait! I can help you!" The Scavengers didn't let him finish. One of them grabbed him, shoving him to the ground. The leader raised his rifle, his grin widening. "See? No loose ends." The crack of a gunshot split the air, and Beck crumpled. "They're moving in," Samuels shouted. The Scavengers surged forward, firing as they advanced. I returned fire, the recoil of my rifle jarring my shoulder. Samuels stayed low, picking his shots carefully. The fight was chaotic, the Scavengers using the terrain to their advantage. They darted between cover, their bullets tearing through the rubble around us. I dropped two of them before a third clipped my leg, sending me sprawling. "Sonny!" Samuels called out, covering me as I scrambled back to my feet. "We need to fall back," I said, blood seeping through my pant leg. "There's nowhere to go," Samuels replied, his tone grim. The Scavengers pressed forward, their leader barking orders as they closed the distance. Bullets whizzed past, chewing through the rubble and sending clouds of dust into the air. Samuels and I were pinned down, the scattered debris barely holding against the onslaught. "Sonny! We're outgunned!" Samuels shouted, his voice raw with panic. "No kidding," I muttered, checking my ammunition. "Just a few rounds left. Not enough." The scavengers moved with cold precision, like predators closing in on cornered prey. They weren't amateurs. They'd done this before. And it showed. I glanced at Beck's body sprawled in the open, a bloody heap of wasted trust. His death hadn't slowed the scavengers, and it sure as hell hadn't bought us any favors. "Samuels, cover me," I barked, gripping my rifle tightly. "What are you doing?" "Changing the game," I replied, darting to a larger chunk of rubble. I leaned out just far enough to line up a shot and fired. The bullet caught one scavenger in the shoulder, spinning him to the ground. His screams cut through the cacophony of gunfire as he clawed at his shattered limb. "Keep the pressure on," I shouted over the chaos. Samuels didn't need to be told twice. He popped up, his aim steady, forcing the scavengers to take cover with carefully placed shots. But their numbers and experience were too much. They kept advancing, closing the gap inch by inch. And then I heard it. The groan, low, guttural, and far too close. "They're coming," I muttered, a cold dread washing over me. Samuels froze, his pale face snapping toward me. "The Horde?" I nodded, scanning the horizon. At first, the shapes were just a ripple on the edge of the wasteland, a trick of the light. But then they became clear, figures shambling forward, slow at first, then faster, like a dam breaking. The Horde had arrived, drawn by the gunfire. The scavengers noticed too. Their leader turned, his face twisting in panic. "Shit! Pull back!" he yelled, waving frantically. But it was too late. The Horde slammed into them like a wave of flesh and bone, their groans rising to a deafening crescendo. The first scavenger didn't even get a chance to scream before he was buried under a mass of gnashing teeth and clawing hands. Another tried to run, but a zombie lunged, its teeth sinking into his neck. Blood sprayed in a wide arc, painting the ground in crimson as the man gurgled, his desperate screams turning into wet gasps. "This is our chance," I said, gripping Samuels by the arm. "We move now." Samuels hesitated, his eyes locked on the carnage. "And if they catch us?" "They'll catch us if we stay. Move." We darted from cover, weaving through the rubble as the scavengers disintegrated under the Horde's relentless assault. One scavenger raised his rifle, aiming at us, but I was faster. My shot hit him square in the chest, and he crumpled, his body twitching as the Horde descended on him moments later. Behind us, the screams grew louder, more desperate. I risked a glance back and immediately regretted it. A scavenger was pinned against the rubble, his arms flailing as 3 zombies tore into him. One ripped open his stomach, spilling his intestines onto the ground, while another gnawed on his arm, pulling chunks of flesh with sickening wet sounds. Another scavenger swung a machete wildly, decapitating one of the undead, but the effort left him exposed. A zombie lunged, grabbing his head with both hands and sinking its teeth into his face. The man shrieked, his cries muffled as the zombie tore his cheek away, leaving a gaping hole where flesh had once been. "Sonny!" Samuels shouted, pulling me back to the present. "Keep going!" I yelled, grabbing his arm as he stumbled over the uneven ground. The scavengers were gone. What remained of them was unrecognizable, broken bodies being ripped apart, their blood soaking into the dust. The wasteland blurred as we ran, our breaths ragged and our muscles screaming for relief. My injured leg burned with every step, the pain sharp and unrelenting, but I couldn't stop. Not now. Ahead, the wall came into view, its towering silhouette a beacon of safety against the chaos. "Almost there," Samuels panted, his voice barely audible over the pounding of our boots. The gates opened just enough to let us through, slamming shut the moment we were inside. We collapsed against the cold metal, gasping for air as the sounds of the Horde faded, replaced by the eerie silence of safety. A guard approached, his face grim. "What the hell happened out there?" I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I pushed myself to my feet, grabbed a piece of chalk from the supply post, and walked to the wall. In bold, jagged letters I wrote, "Rule 13, trust no one outside the wall." I turned to the guard, my voice steady despite the exhaustion. "Because out there, trust will get you killed."